Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, a hearty welcome to our today's AIES talk with the title or the question, any chance for the Iran nuclear deal? We chose this topic not only because it is very actual, but also because it probably is one of the most important questions for diplomacy for the future, for the importance and the possibilities of diplomacy. And we invited two speakers. The one will be Ambassador Ali Asghar Soltanieh, and the other one, Professor Hans Gärtner. Both of them are well-known personalities, and I just want to give you some further information. The one information is that you can also ask questions by or via the YouTube chat, and I will present them at the end of the discussion to the two speakers. And we also will have a presentation by Ambassador Soltanieh. You don't have to photograph it, or you don't have to ask questions at the content, because you also can get the whole presentation afterwards. If you just ask our office, email address is office@aies.at. This is for the formalities, okay? And now we are looking forward to, I hope, round about 1 hour of interesting discussions. May I, at the beginning, just present you our two speakers. Ambassador Ali Asghar Soltanieh had an important birthday last year. He was born 1950 in Tehran, and he is a physicist and at the same time also a diplomat. He studied not in Tehran, or only partly in Tehran, but also at Utah State University in the United States. And he also became a professor. He lectured at a multitude of universities on physicist questions, but also, of course, in international relations. He became a member of many Iranian delegations to many institutions, especially also United Nations, as a member, as a speaker, as a delegation leader. And most people probably know him, got to know him from his function as the Iranian ambassador to United Nations in Vienna, especially the Atomic Energy Agency. So far, he is well known. When he walks down the streets in Tehran, people would stop and would greet him and say, okay, Mr. Ambassador, what a joy to meet you. So he is a well-known person, not only in Vienna, but also in Tehran. Okay, the other one is Professor Hans Gärtner. He's a little bit younger, as far as I know. He will celebrate a bigger birthday in the coming days, not so far away from today. He made his studies in Austria, in Salzburg and in Innsbruck. He had his habilitation, also had quite some work in American universities, in well-known like Stanford or Johns Hopkins in Washington and other places. And his main function, he became professor at the University of Vienna, but also Diplomatic Academy and many other institutions. He also became the director of Austrian think tanks like OIIP or IEIP and so on. And he still is in different advisory, high-ranking advisory functions. So far, we can expect both of them are knowing not only the matter, but also the countries by their own personal experience, America and Iran. And we will start, I would say, with our Iranian speaker today. And I ask Ali Soltaniev, just to give us your presentation, and then we will continue with Professor Heinz Gärtner. Please, Ali.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, in the name of God, the most gracious and the most merciful. Thank you very much, Minister. I appreciate the invitation. It's a great honor for me. I've had the opportunity to your very credible institute before to have participated and also to give a lecture. As you correctly said, this is a crucial matter and a crucial time juncture that we're discussing this matter. Of course, I'm speaking in my personal capacity in order to have sort of a short review and glance of the chronological order where we have been and where we are and the future perspective. I prepared a PowerPoint. With your permission, I will show it out. Okay. Now I hope you can see it now. The thing is that I hope it will work. Now, okay, first of all, it is, of course, my personal viewpoints. When we should have a short glance and, of course, your review, it is prior to JCPOA, which is the agreement negotiated in Vienna, which, of course, when we go prior, then it is, we have had EU3 plus Iran deal, which was up to, in fact, to 2003 up to 2006. And then, of course, implementation time, and then post EU3 and, in fact, deal, which was 2006 until 2013. And then we have the JCPOA era, which is Obama era, Trump era, and now Biden era. Now, for a short review of JCPOA, before that, of course, then we go before revolution and after revolution. Before revolution, which I myself was working in the Atomic Energy Organization, I was witnessing the full cooperation of US and EU on all aspects of fuel cycle, nuclear fuel cycle with Iran. And it takes a long time to give a lecture, a separate lecture for my experience before revolution, what was going on in atomic energy. I will not take time, but there were tremendous cooperation and even competition between US and EU companies to have work and in all aspects of fuel cycle, including enrichment. After revolution, of course, the cessation of all projects, non-compliance by US and EU to their contractual obligations, including Bushehr nuclear power plant. Germany left with 8 billion Deutschmark. They received the money. They didn't finish the Bushehr nuclear power plant, and even they didn't give the equipments that belonged to us. And I, in fact, visited after revolution in Germany. They were in the stores and they charged for storing, but they didn't give us. And therefore, finally, we negotiated with Soviet Union. And of course, Russia was also fully committed to Soviet agreement. And we have now Bushehr power plant with 1,000 megawatt working. Tehran research reactor, American reactor, which had 93% enriched fuel originally. Then we got an agreement before revolution. They didn't give the fuel after revolution. I was director of the center. I communicated with the company. They said the fuel is ready to be shipped because we have already paid it, but the US government didn't give export license. And until today, we didn't receive that fuel that we paid for it before revolution. Then we had, of course, other projects in Eastern technology, uranium exploration. All European and American companies just left and didn't fulfill their obligations. And then, of course, there is an important development in United Nations and international arena, which happened in Vienna. 5 years negotiation of the Committee of Assurance of Supply of IAEA, so-called CAS, collapsed in 1987. I was, in fact, a representative of Iran from 82 to 87, and I was in that committee. The potential suppliers and industrial countries did not agree to have a legally binding instrument for assurance of supply. Therefore, Iran had no other choice to go to its own enrichment. Now, negotiation we have with EU3 first, and then EU3 plus 3 or P5 plus 1. EU3 was in 2003. We had an agreement. Unfortunately, we trusted EU3, and they were not able to deliver their promises and their commitment. For 2.5 years, we suspended all enrichment-related activities and fully implemented additional protocol and modified Code 3.1. And unfortunately, each step they expanded even the agreement. In 2003 of Tehran Saadabad Palace in Brussels, they added the suspension of components, producing of components of centrifuge. And in Paris, even they went further that to suspend any R&D in Iran. And that is why then the country decided to say enough is enough, and we stopped suspension. 2006, then the government decided, because EU3 was saying that US is not on board, then we expanded to 5+1. But it is important that all these resolutions during the suspension of EU3, we had resolutions in Vienna IAEA by EU3. But in those resolutions, they accepted that the suspension was non-legally binding, voluntary, and confidence building. That is why we say all resolutions sending this matter to New York was illegal, because we stopped suspension. This was not legally binding. Anyway, after 2006, then of course we had negotiation of P5+1 or EU3+3. But unfortunately, there were several resolutions at UN Security Council. I don't want to take your time. Then finally, the JCPOA negotiation started 2013 and until 2015, which of course I left 2013 after 7 years as ambassador. I left Vienna, but I was not involved in the negotiation. And finally, negotiation was concluded in 14th of July 2015, entered into force 16th of January 2016. And of course, Resolution 2231, adopted in 20th July 2015, endorsed JCPOA, but unfortunately added another Appendix B for other military activities, which this is one of my criticism. Of course, with due respect, in JCPOA, we have made too much compromise, and also the resolution was not what we expected. It should only endorse JCPOA and not deal with other issues. Now, a short review of JCPOA era. During the Obama era, of course, even after the agreement made by Obama administration, many sanctions and banking constraints were not removed. Of course, EU firms came to Iran, they had some MOUs, but never realized. And then Trump era, of course, May 2018, withdrawal from the JCPOA, and of course, threatening other members of the JCPOA not to comply, which is very odd, and also reimposing sanctions and maximum pressure. All you know that state terrorist actions against assassinating General Soleimani, Dr. Fakhrizadeh, all happened one by one to put pressure on the Iranian government to yield, and of course, we never yield to the pressures. And of course, U.S. U.S. failed to have UN Security Council for reimposing sanctions, which was a serious failure in United Nations Security Council. Then Biden era declared, of course, determination to return JCPOA during campaign, but raised missiles, regional issues, and no action until now, which was expected, of course. And of course, then we have Iranian parliament, which decided with some deadlines. According to, of course, the IAEA reports, over 16 reports of IAEA, Iran have been fully committing its obligation. Even 1 year after the U.S. withdrawal, we continued as so-called strategic patient to continue our obligation to show the international community that we want to be committed to our, in fact, compliance with the JCPOA. Iran, of course, could have withdrawn after the U.S. withdrawal, but we decided to give a chance to JCPOA to survive. Thus, took incremental steps, reducing some obligations according to Article 26, particularly 36. And of course, finally, the patient is reaching its limit, and the law passed by Parliament has this clear signal. Still, of course, the law is giving a last chance to things to put on track, because the law has even have been drafted in such a way to give a chance, so that I hope that the wisdom is there and some things will be done. Now, important point, the leader, Supreme Leader of Iran on 22nd of February, a couple of days ago, in fact, reiterated that we fulfilled our obligations because of teaching of Islam. We are committed that if we make a commitment to outside, even during the Prophet Muhammad, peace upon him, when he made an agreement with non-Muslim, they were committed to, and that is why the leader said, based on that teaching of Islam, we were committed to our commitment. Of course, as long as the others are committed. Unfortunately, the others were not, and we have noticed that this was the case, and they were not fulfilling their obligation. Now, the killer proposals to JCPOA, missiles and regional. The issue of the missiles being a strategic, integrated component of national defense and security, and also bearing in mind the bitter experience of Saddam missiles attack, and the fact that there is no international treaty on missiles is not negotiable, and this is a red line. Therefore, the other parties should be realistic and do not expect us to do something which is impossible. The other issue, however, is about regional security concerns due to U.S., of course, intervention, occupation, Israeli existential threat against Iran, and huge military spending by regional countries. It is a difficult issue, but Iran has always, in fact, opted for negotiation of regional dialogue, and that is why our foreign minister proposing Munich Security Conference, regional dialogue in Persian Gulf, and also our president in the United Nations gave the initiative of hope that you're well aware of that. Now, what happens next? The scenario of post-EU treaty non-compliance in 2006 will repeat. This is my very clear message, perhaps with wariness and warning and expectation that there is a wisdom to understand. This will happen because the parliament is determined, the whole country is determined, the people are frustrated, and therefore we will stop everything if there is nothing done by the other side lifting the sanctions. As the officials, including our leader, said, we have the first to see that all sanctions will be lifted, and then of course we will be discussing the return of US to JCPOA or any other things. Iran is not voluntarily implementing, of course, additional protocol, as you noticed, as yesterday, 23rd, according to Parliament's decision, of course, but all inspections under comprehensive safeguards of NPT will continue without interruption, as you are well aware. However, I will continue the safeguard, as I said, on NPT, and therefore the important thing is, of course, that the 20% enrichment is continued, but of course, IAEA has a supervision. This is important, although we have started 20%. Production of uranium metal for manufacturing new types of the fuel. We have started, but it is under the IAEA safeguard. Advancement of centrifuge, and also going to new design of heavy water reactor when the times of the parliament law will come. Of course, all will still be on the IAEA safeguard. Now, let me go just a moment. I don't know where is the last one. Anyway, okay, let me stop this thing, but I had the last slide, in fact, which was a gleam of hope that I wanted to show you. Let me see if I can have it now. Okay, yes, I have it now. I'm sorry. Now, the number 10 is, of course, only if the sanctions are removed and by Trump. The sanctions are three types of sanctions. One, sanctions lifted according to JCPOA. Second one, Trump sanctions. The third one, sanctions with the new designation. All these should be removed. And then, of course, Iran will be, in that case, ready to go ahead and to go back to its, in fact, the compliance. Now, the other issue is, of course, this is important message I have today. Unrealized expectation from Biden administration. Because there were expectations in different parts of the world, in Europe, even in Iran. We expected that Mr. Biden, when it comes to the office, will have a condemnation of the Trump policy and action on Iran, especially on JCPOA, as a first step, regret and sympathy for serious moral and financial damages inflicted on Iranians by his predecessor. determination to compensate the damage inflicted on Iranian people, especially patients suffering by U.S. sanctions for medicine, and of course, issuance of executive order to remove all 3 types of sanctions imposed by Trump. And the last one, willingness to come back to JCPOA, of course, if there is no objection by P4+1 and Iran. Now, negative impact of the language. I'm just,
time.
Yes,
please look at the time.
Okay, in 1 minute I'll finish. In 1 minute I'll finish. Negative impact of the language of threat, of course. This is very clear that we said American, this is the statement of the leader 2 days ago, the Americans and leader parties have used unjust language against Iran. Iran will not yield to pressure. Our stand will not. And of course, he said, we have heard many nice words and the promise, and this is the time that we want the action. Of course, this is something we hope. And this is the last slide, that glimpse of hope. If the wisdom and understanding, undeniable fact of coping realities comes to the White House, immediate action on the measures, I hope that we can put everything on right track. And thank you very much. That is the all of my stop. I hope that I can stop. Can your colleagues could help to stop?
Okay. Ambassador, thank you very much for your presentation, which was a big list, also a big list to follow. Okay, and now we go into the discussion, and I want to ask our next speaker, Professor Heinz Gärtner, how do you see this situation? What worked out well? What went wrong? Where do you see the real challenges?
Thank you, Werner. First of all, I want to thank you and the AIIS to organize this very timely meeting. It's really now open to debate internationally, and it's good that we can participate in discussion. And I also want to thank Ambassador Soltanier for his detailed overview and presentation. So not much would be left to say, but let me add several observations. First of all, to the JCPOA as such. When the JCPOA has been negotiated in the last phase in Vienna before the Coburg, I was there almost every second day to find out what's going on in this rooms of the hotel, and once in a while we get a glimpse on Foreign Minister Zarif, Secretary of State Kerry. We wanted to get some information. We didn't get much information, but however, we got. So we, when I say we, that was me and many journalists there, and some scholars. But the impression we got that every comma and every full stop has been agreed upon. So it is probably the best negotiated arms control agreement in history. It's not only technical. It has a comprehensive verification mechanism better than any other arms control agreement I know of. But it doesn't have only this technical provisions. It stresses also that the JCPOA should strengthen and support cooperation and confidence building. That's in almost every chapter of the JCPOA, which has about 160 pages. This is mentioned. Also, Ali mentions this Article 26 of the JCPOA. This Article 26 also says that the parties should, in good faith, take all efforts that Iran gets all the benefits of the lifting of the sanctions. Basically, you could say if when Trump left the JCPOA in 2018, or already before that, he was violating the JCPOA already before, because he was preventing that Iran would get the lift the benefits of the lifting of the sanctions. Why is this important? When Austrian President Heinz Fischer was the first head of state of the European Union to visit Iran after the GCPOA has been adopted, and I was part of this economic delegation. And when we were in Tehran, we saw that hundreds of memoranda of understanding has been signed. There was a huge hope that there would be an increase of investment and trade. After Trump withdrew from the GCPOA in May 2018, most of these MOAs have been abandoned, and trade and investment 2019 and 20 of the European Union with Tehran has been reduced by about 70%. So Iran did not get much of the benefits, but neither did the European Union, where many companies were also hoping for better trade and investment. On top of that, of course, the Trump administration imposed or threatened to European companies with secondary sanctions if they are willing to do business with Iran. I have to say, President Biden stresses transatlantic partnership, but there was no sign that he would lift the secondary sanction on European companies. So this would be an important step that the Europeans could act by themselves, and the Europeans can act by themselves if the US is hesitating now, as we can see also with the Biden administration. If the US is hesitating to come back to the GCPOA, even so there was this lip service that they want to come back, there's still, as you said, Ambassador, a window of opportunity. But the European Union can take the initiative, and you mentioned this in your slides as well, that in 2003 the negotiations already started with the E3 and the EU3 and Iran. And the US didn't want to participate in the first place. And then they came back as an observer. And what you didn't mention, in 2011, when the US noticed there's something going on with the European Union and Iran, they started secret negotiations in Oman. So Iran and the US. Eventually, they all came back to negotiate the GCPOA. So the European Union can take the initiative, but so far, I do not have the impression that the Biden administration would be in favor of a European initiative, and they still have to wait for the US to do something, which is unfortunate because the US now is coming back to the other issues again, as you mentioned, missiles and regional behavior, which I will talk a little bit later about. However, we have to say, in order to make a difference between the Trump administration and the Biden administration, the policy and the approach by the Trump administration of maximum pressure on Iran did not work. It weakened, of course, the Iranian economy. However, all the goals what the Trump administration had for this maximum pressure, renegotiate the GCPOA, include missiles, include regional behavior, and of course there are some hawks in the administration who pressed for regime change. So nothing of that happened. So that was basically a failure, and that's what I guess the Biden administration noticed, and the Biden administration now said we want to come back. And I do think that's a test case for the Biden administration because they stress multilateralism. And multilateralism and the GCPOA is an example of multilateral arms control. It's for the European Union, basically it was a masterpiece of effective multilateralism. The European Union was not very successful to implement the GCPOA, we have to say, because of the secondary sanctions, but also because there was a lack of courage to stand up against Donald Trump as well. And but still, now the Joint Commission of the GCPOA, in an informal meeting in December 2020, they seemed to agree that they come back to the original GCPOA. So dropping for the time being the other issues like missiles, as you said, Ambassador, and regional behavior, which I have to say, which both arguments are pretty flawed for the reasons you mentioned, Ambassador, but for other reasons as well. There is no arms control agreement in history which includes behavior. That's behavior. You cannot include behavior in an arms control agreement. We wouldn't have had one during the Cold War. And I have to say there are other actors in the region which behavior would have to be addressed as well, like Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, but also Israel, if you talk about behavior of Iran. Secondly, missiles. Of course, missiles are included and launchers of warheads are included in arms control agreements. However, it does not only include one party. So if you include missiles, it addresses the missiles of several parties. So if you want to talk about missiles, you have to do it in a regional context, including the missiles of Saudi Arabia, for example, which already have a longer range than the missiles of Iran, with about 2,500 kilometers. So that would well fit in this idea of Foreign Minister Zarif, who called for a regional dialogue. So why not arms control negotiations in the regional dialogue as well? So, but now to end a little bit on an optimistic note, I agree with you that there is a small window of opportunity, because all sides seem to agree in a first step we have to go back to the original GCPOA. Of course, there will be technical details. When should the GCPOA be restarted? But that's maybe up to more detailed discussion. And the members of the GCPOA and the EU foreign ministers who met last week, there seemed to be that the original GCPOA should be the first step, and the other issues should be decoupled, separated. So there should, of course, Biden and Macron, they all would say we have to address issues and regional behavior. But if you do it later, it's another story. Just go back to the GCPOA. That would be a good idea. There is now a little bit of poker game going on. Who is doing the first step? Should the US go back to the GCPOA first? Of course, they left the GCPOA. It would be fair if they go back, but they are arguing, no, Iran should take the first step. So I do think that's an unnecessary game of chicken, because if you agree on substance, it doesn't really matter who takes the first step. And if the European Union will be able to mediate a step-by-step approach, it would be very good. Why do I say it's a small window of opportunity? Because if you had listened to President Biden at the Munich Security Conference and to Secretary of State Blinken when he spoke to the EU foreign ministers, but also he repeated this argument at the UN conference on disarmament, he again came in with this argument of the missiles, to bring in the missiles in. There is a strong pressure internally in the United States on President Biden to include these other issues as well. That's why he is hesitating. I think that's a wrong approach, because opponents of the GCPOA will never stop anyway. So they can make any compromises. But he should have the courage and say, now let's revive the GCPOA in the first place. And the European Union, they woke up. It was actually a little embarrassing for the European Union that Foreign Minister Zarif had to remind the European Union there's a joint commission which is chaired by the High Representative Josep Borrell, that they should take the initiative, what they did now, what they are doing now. And there will be a meeting in March, I guess it will be in March, where they will address this issue. I hope they drop the other issues, missiles and behavior, because they are non-starters, as you said, Ambassador, and negotiate how to implement the original JCPOA. Okay, Werner, I stop here for the time being.
Okay, thank you very much for your comments, for your presentation. Maybe just a few, just a short explanation, because our participants heard so frequently the word JCPOA, and maybe somebody is not so familiar with this expression. This only means Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, and this is the official title for the Iran nuclear deal. So far, I myself usually I'm using just the expression of Iran nuclear deal because this is understandable for everybody, but please take notice, the correct expression is JCPOA. What I can see from this discussion up to now, okay, there is an agreement that, of course, this deal was not only important, but more than important, because it was one of the major deals in history. And of course, also just the fact, if you look to the situation, that the fact that all the permanent members of the Security Council of United Nations, plus Germany, plus EU, participated in negotiating with a regional power in this deal, then you have to be aware that, of course, if such a deal does not work out, which deal should work out in the future? And insofar, this is a major question for diplomacy, for the overall question of how valid is importance and importance of diplomacy. Okay, so we agree that it will be very not only valuable but necessary to come back to this deal. And we also can realize that it obviously is not so easy due to some different facts. So you already talked a little bit about the question how difficult it is for some partners to go back. Where are the big questions? So far, my next question would be, okay, what could one do in order to start the next meetings to go into the depth, to go back to the treaty? Due to the situation that, of course, every country has its own political situation, its specific political situation. We will have elections in Iran in June, and of course also President Biden is confronted with a situation that the majority of American people
we wait for let's speak. Werner Fasland asked some questions already. So what can we do? He will come back soon, I guess. So Ali, Mr. Ambassador, do you want to start and address the question somehow?
Yes.
Yes,
if you permit me. A couple of points. First of all, Iran, of course, have been facing, as you correctly said, because of JCPOA, the most intrusive, robust inspection. And the patience is having coming to the end. And the only thing that I'm worried that they consider this law passed by parliament as a political bluff. That is a miscalculation by European or American. That is what I'm worried about. Therefore, they should worry, in fact, to the fact that if they will assume that this law was a sort of bluff, then we are in serious trouble. It means that they will not take a serious step. Second point, it is not the government, it is not even the parliament. The solid voice, finalized voice was the Supreme Leader. Very crystal clear. We want action. Nothing should be happen unless the sanctions will be removed. Therefore, I have no doubt personally that nothing else would happen. If they assume that by sort of artificial gesture, as it was done by Biden administration, to take the letter of the Mr. Trump's back from UN Security Council for snap back or so, this will not work. This is not working anymore. That is what I'm sure. Therefore, that is why my suggestion was clear. Take this matter in serious consideration. And the matter is very simple. Executive order to remove sanctions. And these should be actions rather than just repeating. The other point is European Union have lost its the confidence that we should require for interlocutor or play a role. Not only because of during EU3 that we have a very bitter memory of in 2003 that we were implementing and they were not in fact fulfilling their
still it worked out
during
eventually.
the Trump administration. I'm sorry. During the Trump administration, there is a delay in the voice. I didn't notice what you said. But anyway, the Trump administration, unfortunately, they were not able to even materialize the INSTEX financial mechanism. How can we trust? And the worst thing is, simply I can mention, I think that this is food for thought. After Biden administration, there is a new chapter. I don't understand why European all of a sudden become so hawkish, and the foreign minister of Germany and France had a very, very tough position about Iran. This is the time that everybody expected the new chapter after Trump disappeared, that everybody will be constructive. All of a sudden they threaten Iran or accused Iran. And the last point is, as it was decided during negotiation in Vienna JCPOA, they put aside every other issues and concentrated on nuclear issues. I think this was practical. I don't say good or bad, but it was practical. For the same reason, bringing other issues now, before everything is put on track, it means full compliance by US, and then US is there, and we have everything put back, and we are going back again, or non-compliance, then the other issues will be able to reflect. Let me give you a very historical memory. Maybe this is almost the first time I'm saying here now. In 2016, after JCPOA, there was a warming up meeting of the Munich Security Conference in IPIS, the think tank of Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Tehran, and I was a researcher there, and I was participating. A meeting, not very large meeting, but it was warming up. Mr. Steinmeier also participated, and some other officials. Everybody was happy, explaining about good things and good future about this implementation of JCPOA and hopes for the future. I remember in his talk, the last part of his talk, he said, by the way, I'm going from here to Riyadh, from Tehran to Riyadh. And he was giving indication that with this new environment, positive environment after JCPOA, that there is no tension, everybody tries to cooperate. In this environment, possibly there is a possibility for interaction of environment issue, and maybe EU could be able to play a role. This is just to give an example, to give indication. Unless we are not in the same environment, you cannot even expect the European be trustful by Iranians that they can play any role. They have not. They have all been destructive, or they have been a stalemate. They have been unable to fulfill their expectation. Therefore, this is a clear message. Let's put everything in right track. And on the issue, not missiles, on the issue of regional or other issues, I'm sure EU has a great potential that could play in order to move towards peace and prosperity in the region, or other issues that Iran could also talk with. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And Hans, how do you see the situation now?
Yeah, thank you. There was some. I missed some of your points at the end, but I still can respond, I guess. Now, first of all, I want to answer the question of Werner Fasslamt about arms control. If the GCPOA will not be revived, what does it say about multilateral arms control? That's definitely true, because the GCPOA was an example of multilateral arms control which worked and was implemented in the first place, and it was based on international law. It was according to, because it didn't pass the Congress in the United States. However, is based on international law. The Article 2231 of the UN Security Council resolution. So that's why when Trump left the GCPOA, it was a violation of international law as well. So if the US didn't want to join the GCPOA, it should have abided at least the UN resolution 2231, I think, which was very important. But it could go further. Maybe Ambassador will deny this, but if the tensions become more difficult, and if the pressure on Iran will increase, that Iran will not be and say, Iran, we cannot accept this condition on missiles and regional behavior, and Iran might not only drop out of the GCPOA, but also maybe drop out of the Non-Proliferation Treaty eventually. That would be a definite blow of multilateral arms control and of the Non-Proliferation Treaty altogether. So there are many dangers for multilateral arms control on the horizon. But probably some of the opposition of the GCPOA in the region, and I can mention Saudi Arabia maybe and Israel as well, but also within the United States, they do not really care about multilateral arms control. So the opposition, which comes from several think tanks, but also from Congress, but also from within the Democratic Party of the US, opposition against the GCPOA at the same time is then opposition against Iran, because Iran should not get too much powerful in the region. And I just want to mention there is an international ranking about the geopolitical position of Iran, and Iran still ranks globally on the 14th place, well before Israel and Saudi Arabia, including them all these geopolitical criteria, what you have, your size, population, land-sea relations, infrastructure, education, discipline of the military. Even so, the military expenditures of Iran are very, very low compared to those of neighboring countries, 1/7 of Saudi Arabia's expansion. But still, Iran is a powerful state, and of course, other states in the region and the US do not want to become Iran too powerful, and they see the GCPOA as a road that Iran might benefit economically and geopolitically from this agreement. So they are not only against a nuclear weapon Iran, they are against a too powerful Iran. So we have to face this question as well. If I say there's an opposition within the US against this GCPOA and against the Iranian geopolitical position as such, and the Democrats, they would not, and Biden would not do well if he yields to this pressure, to this internal pressure, because the pressure will not stop anyway. And I just want to bring two historical analogies where this Democrats yielded to this pressure of Republicans and conservatives and hawks, which really led to a catastrophe and a disaster The one would be 1964, when President Johnson escalated the Vietnam War because of this pressure, and that was the beginning of a 10-year disastrous war for the US as well. But also in 2003, when most of the Democratic senators voted for the Iraq War, only 2, I guess, voted against it, and the Iraq War it was on the false premises, and it turned out to be a catastrophe as well. And I have to say, also Joseph Biden voted for the war in Iraq, but he distanced himself only 2 years later in 2005, I have to say, to his credit. So last observation, I do think, because you were talking about the parliament, and Werner Faslam was asking about the elections in Iran coming, I do think it matters. It matters who is president, not only in the United States, but who is also president in Iran. Of course, we know there are some isolationists, not only in the US, but also in Iran, who really don't want the JCPOA, the return to the JCPOA. And if you look back to this last window of opportunity in 2015, when the JCPOA has been adopted, we had this combination of President Rouhani and President Obama. So that was a unique opportunity, and we should not miss this situation right now. We do not know what's going on, what will go on after the election in Iran. So the window of opportunity now is very small. It is here. It should concentrate on the original JCPOA, and if it is not seized in the next couple of months, then it might be closed, and then the JCPOA might be gone as well.
Yeah, thank you very much for, please, Ambassador.
Yes, a couple of points. First of all, this is, I want to have a clear message that there is no doubt that those opponents of JCPOA in America, in the region, some countries in the region, Israelis or war, this was a political game. They were very happy, and they make a party when JCPOA was negotiated and finalized in Vienna, because this was a tremendous, unprecedented restriction and inspection on Iran in the history. No other country. Therefore, they have celebrated. But some, the Republicans were against JCPOA because it was a legacy of the Obama, including Trump, even during Mr. Obama. Therefore, this was just a challenge of parties. But the text of the JCPOA, this sort of tremendous, unfortunate concession by Iran and the restriction, they were very happy. If I just propose that if today Iran said we have decided to go out of JCPOA, the same opponents of JCPOA will try to scream, no, Iran should be JCPOA. They bring the other issues, of course, and also the issue that they were confronting between two parties, Republican and, in fact, Democrats. This is one point. Second point, Iran has been always, and it is a religious decree, and the leader also repeated a couple of days ago, we are against chemical weapons, nuclear weapons, the weapons of mass destruction, because religious school of thought. And this is not because of the whoever, Israelis or Americans, put pressure not to Iran to go to nuclear. Who are they? If we wanted to have, we have great potential scientific, technical cooperation to do it. And I am sure, being aware and following this matter, that this was clear line of instruction that we cannot go, we will not go on that line, and we will not go for nuclear weapons. The other issue is the situation is now very crucial. I think that, in fact, Professor Gardner talked about election. Of course, the position of the whole establishment is very clear now. If they come back to fulfill all their obligation, lift the sanction, we are ready to continue, go back, and they put everything right track. Otherwise, I will not personally rule out that JCPOA, as you said, will disappear. This is nothing to do with who is in the government, coming in the government. In Iran, nobody In Iran, nobody, in fact, now will support the JCPOA. But in some countries might have, but this is not the case in Iran, because even those who are supporting the JCPOA discussion because of expectation of economic relief, now they are fully disappointed. If you can have a poll in Iran, the majority are not in favor of JCPOA now. Unfortunately, this is the situation. Let's hope the wisdom is prevailed in White House and EU. I suggested in one other meeting that perhaps those in EU3, if they cannot help, please keep quiet. Let the things go, and hopefully the people find a solution and come to amicable solution at the end of the day.
Yeah, I have a few questions from the public. The first one would be, did the Abraham Accord, the so-called Abraham Accord, change Tehran's position? This would be a question for Ambassador Soltanian. We have already talked about the impact of a possibly new conservative government after Iranian elections. And a third question, maybe a good question also for Professor Gärtner, is there a possibility of regional dialogue due to what Saudi Arabia said to be a part of any further negotiations? Would it make sense to include maybe also Saudi Arabia? Then there's also the question of whether there might be an effect of the corona pandemic to the prospects of a solution. And, okay, the other one, the last one is, of course, the question whether or why Iran does not stick to the JCPOA, not to mention Iran long-range missile programs and terrorist activities all over the region. This is questions that came in. I offer it to you. Please try to answer it pretty shortly before I go into a next and final round. Okay, Ambassador, you start.
First of all, normalization relation in the region, so-called Abraham Accord or whatever, is a counterproductive. I had a lecture yesterday with the UN, in fact, workshop on Middle East free zone from WMD. I mentioned that. Therefore, whatever has happened, it is counterproductive to the even ultimate goal of having peace in the region, because this is just provocation, and this is manufactured, in fact, imposed sort of normalization process. This is not natural. Therefore, this would not work, as Camp David has not worked for decades. They should understand this is not working. For the regional arrangement, of course, one, we're talking about Persian Gulf. As I said, the countries in the region should work together and to find amicable solution to have better understanding. And in the context of the Middle East, there have been some, in fact, initiatives as in NPT for Middle East free zone. That is in that context. In any context, this normalization not only would not help, it is counterproductive. The other issue, to bring the others, that Saudi Arabia or other to negotiation, these are all killer proposals. What for? If they are going for the nuclear matters, there's already JCPOA is there, and we will fulfill. If you are going to talk about regional matters and Saudi Arabia, of course, is in the region, this is another matter in the different context after the nuclear issue is dealt with. Corona, yes. Corona has negatively impacted on Iranian public opinion to be against any deal with US, with European, and to go further and to have further concession. That is why they don't even care to continue with the JCPOA, because the Corona, with the sanction, proved that during this Corona, that the people were desperate need of medicine. Americans prevented any sort of medicine due to sanction. Therefore, that, yes, Corona has made an in-depth impact, negative impact of Iranian opinion. About, of course, there are about the compromises, and of course, it will reduce the possibility of any compromise in the future because of what happened in the Corona. Thank you.
Yeah, Professor?
Yeah, let me start also with the Abraham Accords. I agree with Ambassador that it's very difficult and to some extent counterproductive. Why would I say so? Because the Abraham Accords, they look at Iran's position in the region. As I mentioned before, Iran has a very strong geopolitical position. What do you do if you have a strong country there? You, according to the balance of power theory, you build an alliance. So the Abraham Accords are an alliance in the emerging. So if you read it, it says we have a common security agenda, and also the decision of the Gulf Cooperation Council that says we are creating a unified military command. And on top of that, if this is becoming an alliance, we will have a nuclear alliance here. So we have Arab states allied with a nuclear power, Israel, in the region. So it's very difficult to think how Iran might react if you have a nuclear alliance, if you're facing a nuclear alliance here. So that means also it would be a blow, as you mentioned, Ambassador, to the concept of the nuclear weapon-free zone in the Middle East. So I do not think that President Biden will will abandon the Abraham Accords. He will stick to them, and I do think Israel and this Arab states as well. Maybe Saudi Arabia will join later. They have not joined because at the same time they're abandoning the Palestinians. So because the Arab peace plan of 2003 requests the recognition of Israel only within the borders of 67, and now they're having diplomatic relations with Israel without recognizing the borders of 67. That means the two-state solution is not on the table anymore. So what Iran could do in order to get this into this regional dialogue, Abraham Accords will stay. Iran could remind the Arab states on their own peace plan of 2003 and say you have to come back to the idea of your own idea that you recognize Israel in the 67 borders. Iran could say, and you will disagree now, Mr. Ambassador, if you do so, we will do so as well, because it helps the Palestinian. So a regional dialogue on the basis of the Arab peace plan, I said 2003, I think it was 2002, of the Arab peace plan. On the basis, we can have a regional dialogue. So, besides of that, the regional dialogue on arms control should continue as well. May I say some critical note, because Mr. Ambassador, you said, of course, Iran does not want to have nuclear weapons, which I believe it doesn't. However, it is playing now with the idea that it's weaponizing its nuclear problem, getting closer and closer and closer. So there is some credibility gap here. So saying, no, we don't want to, but we are moving towards it. So that is some difficult to explain to the other parties of the JCPOA. So that's why I do think it would be. So now I might make a bold suggestion, Ali. I suggest that, may I just end with this? I suggest that Iran should sign and ratify the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. So in 2017, Iran voted in the United Nations Assembly. It voted for this treaty. And now Iran is saying we don't want to have nuclear weapons, which I believe, but in order to underline this, why not join the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons?
Okay, Ali, you raised a hand, maybe a short answer.
Yes, it's a very important point in this area of disarmament. In fact, we have been for disarmament, nuclear disarmament. We have been in the negotiation of TPNW, banning treaty for nuclear weapon, and we have voted for it. We're among 122. The reason that we have not signed or ratified is because of we have bad experience with the NPT, and the parliament is not going to go to have another security-oriented treaty just easily. That is it. But the same as for CTBT. CTBT, we have signed it. We are against any nuclear test, but of course there are 7 other not ratified yet. But we are worried because we have been the only victim of NPT. That is the reason. But I personally think that why not? We should join this ban treaty, which Austria has had great role. In fact, I commend Austria for playing such a role in this negotiation and finalizing and enter it to force. Of course, it is a mild one. It doesn't have verification system. But anyway, this is the first gesture towards disarmament or elimination of nuclear weapons. This is the case. Therefore, this is answer to your question. But the other issue, which is very delicate, you mentioned. You know that technically nuclear technology have dual use areas. Enrichment is one of them. For the fuel of the reactors, even Tehran research reactor, we need a 20% enrichment. In fact, the fuel of Tehran reactor, which I was in charge of it, was 93% enriched fuel, which we got from US. Therefore, enrichment is another matter, but at the same time, enrichment is the prerequisite if anybody wants to have a nuclear weapon and they want to have it, or reprocessing. Therefore, many activities, nuclear capability might be a first step that could be for peaceful purposes or not. The only thing is it should have under international monitoring. And that is why we have accepted the NPT, we have accepted non-proliferation treaty and inspection and safeguards.
Okay. Is there anything from your side, Hans?
Are we in the final round already, or can we go on? I just want to say something about the European Union still, what they could do.
Okay. And then
no, let me, maybe I'm repeating a little bit what I have said. We don't really know how the Biden administration eventually now will act. The promise to come back to the JCPOA, still they want to include these issues of the Trump administration. It's amazing how persistent these arguments are that came in the Trump administrations, but it didn't come in the Obama administration, these missiles and the regional behavior. And now somehow these arguments are continued and picked up by media, by decision takers in Europe and then the US, and they do not go away. And I do not know how the Biden administration now will act on it. What I suggest is that the European Union takes now the initiative if the United States hesitates to come back to the JCPOA and do as they did before the JCPOA after 2003. Even so, Mr. Ambassador, you said you had difficult times with the European Union. That's true. But eventually, that's what I was saying, eventually it worked out and it brought the US to the negotiation table. It is wrong when the US is saying the pressure on Iran put Iran on the negotiation table. It was the other way around. The negotiations between Iran and the EU3 brought the US eventually to the negotiating table. And that's an example the Europeans should take seriously. And the Europeans should definitely, and I'm repeating myself as well, put pressure on the Biden administration that they lift the secondary sanctions. So that's a discriminatory act which has been imposed by the Trump administration, and if Biden takes the partnership with the European Union seriously, it has to free the European Union up from these secondary sanctions, that the Europeans can act and also do business. European companies can do business with Iran as they like, which would of course facilitate the possibility to implement the JCPOA as well and to lift sanctions altogether.
Okay, thank you. So maybe
my last word is I want to appreciate Minister for this arrangement, and it was great honor to also have Professor Gärtner, who has been always very knowledgeable and very pragmatic. Let's hope for the better. Thank you.
Maybe a few words from my side additionally. As I stated at the beginning, I see, whether people think that the deal was a good deal or not such a good deal or whatever, or maybe even a bad deal. I think the most important questions will be the impact for diplomacy. Because if this deal does not work out, skepticism about effectiveness of diplomacy will rise, and we will go more and more into a tendency of power play and power politics and less diplomacy. This is the most important thing. The second is, does anybody want that we will have a new race of nuclear weapons? I mean, if you look to the situation, you have to be aware that one of Iran's neighbors, Pakistan, is a nuclear power. And not very far, Poland, Israel is a nuclear power. And if you look also to the situation in North Korea, one might not underestimate this tendency to go towards nuclear armament. And therefore, it will be very, very important. Because if Iran will become a nuclear power, it's only a question of minutes that also Turkey and Saudi Arabia will develop similar or the same tendencies. And insofar, this treaty, this deal is necessary for peace and security, not only in the region, but of the whole world. Second is, if we go back to the conditions, of course, as Heinz Gärtner stated, this separation of fields. I would say, of course, the missile question is a question that is discussed all over Europe. But if you look at this very specific situation in the Middle East, you have to be aware that Iran does not have big capabilities with its air force. The last fighters were bought during the Shah period. And of course, no country can renounce completely to the protection of its airspace. And therefore, I would see, or I would propose that you have to look at this strategic overall situation if you want to go into it. This is what I see. And the third point I would like to talk about is we are, of course, in a changed situation to, if you look back to situation in 1915 or 14 or 13 and so on. Why? Of course, the Iran question does not have priority, does not have the function of priority number one in American politics and not in European politics. The pandemic has changed very much. Fighting against pandemic, against the economic consequences and so on, and the rise of China, this has changed a little bit. And this, therefore, also will be important for every side to look at it. Priorities have changed. Insofar, one must not overplay the chess game or the political poker game, which is usual at the start of negotiations. That's what I wanted to say. What I see is that America has not overcome its traumatic experiences with Iran, and Iran has not quite overcome its traumatic experiences with America. What do I mean? When you talk in Tehran with people, it's only a question of a few minutes when you talk about the situation between the Western world and Iran. That's the name of former Prime Minister Mossadegh would come into the game. Insofar, this meddling of Western powers into Iranian politics certainly is an important factor psychologically. Iran always has been a big power and wants to keep its independence. This is what people have to see from outside. And at the other hand, also, America could overcome its traumatic experiences with Vietnam. It could overcome its traumatic experiences with North Korea. I mean, if you think that President Trump, whether this was wise or not is another case, even went personally to meet President Kim of North Korea and so on. But it has not overcome the Iranian Revolution and the traumatic experiences. So far, I think it's necessary to be aware that both sides have to look at the other side maybe in a different way as they did in the past. And if I look to the question, what is really, making it very difficult to go into a new process, to go into results, I would say there are three words that are very important. This is trust, this is faith. What I mean is keeping the faith and allowing the other side to keep the faith. Very important. Everybody wants to keep his faith. And the third one is facts, the possibility of results. And this means for me, no more words, but try to establish facts. And if I take the nowadays situation and I could make a proposal, I would say maybe start with, look also at the language of the other side, not only in a negative way, but maybe also in a positive way. Of course, one can criticize it, but also one could maybe, also take the other side's steps and words in a different way. What do I mean? Maybe President Biden's announcement to stop armament deliveries for the war in Yemen. Couldn't it be maybe one signal? On the other hand, also the fact that there is sort of an interim solution for AIEA inspections. Isn't this a clear signal? I just put it on the table and everybody can take also his solutions out of it. But what I think what really would be easily possible is to take the pandemic, to take COVID-19 as one case, to deliver medicine without asking very much, without going into big processes. I think it should be done because facts will decide whether we will have positive or negative facts in the future. And with these words, I want to finish. I want to thank Ambassador Ali Soltanieh and Professor Hans Gärtner for their more or less spontaneous readiness to talk about it. And I'm sure it will not be the last time that we talked about it. I also want to make an announcement for next week. Next week on Wednesday at 4 p.m., we also will have an interesting topic, not as hot maybe, but certainly very actual. It will be the question of Myanmar, crisis and perspectives. And we will talk with two very well-informed people about it so far. If you are interested also in the future of the Myanmar question, please just join us at our AIES talk next Wednesday at 4 p.m. And now I really want to thank you for not only your readiness, but also for your clear words. What we need is, not only to have positions, but also to speak it out, but also to try to understand the other side, because you only can find a consensus. You only can go towards an agreement when you try to understand the other sides. Where are the problems? how does the other side look at it, and what could be a solution in this question. Okay, so thank you very much once again.
Thank you, Werner.
Looking forward to our next meeting, and I also want to thank all our participants, for their patience. We went over time, but thank you very much for staying with us and for your company in this very important discussion. Goodbye.
Thank you, Ali. Thank you, Werner.
My pleasure, and thank you indeed. Thank you.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
No, it was a pleasure. Thank you very much. I think, okay, it was a very useful contribution, and I'm sure